Thank you all here today. My name is State Representative Carl Seel. I'm the author of the current candidate certification bill. It's House Bill 2480. And all it merely does is require any candidate running for office to demonstrate or sign under penalty of perjury that when they run for office, they meet the qualifiers of the office they seek. Moreover, it gives average citizens the capacity to sue or have standing in court to challenge any candidate that appears on the Arizona ballot as to whether or not they're properly qualified to be on said ballot. So once again, it gives the average citizen the capacity to preserve, protect, and defend their Constitution. I am joined by many of my colleagues and other public officials, some of which I'm sure you'll quite clearly recognize. I am, of course, joined here by our esteemed Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who is in support of the bill, and he'll speak briefly and shortly, as well as my colleague, State Senator Lori Klein. State Representative Jack Harper is here with us today as well. I have Representative Peggy Judd, of course, here, Representative David Burnell Smith, and leader of the Tea Party, the Red Mountain Tea Party, Randy Hatch, will speak to you shortly, and Mr. Mike Zullo, who is the chief investigator in relationship to some of the evidence, and he's going to reveal some of that here today in a more condensed version, and he'll be speaking to you at the tail end, after which any of my colleagues or myself or Sheriff Joe, if they are willing to stand for questions, I will of course stand for questions about the bill after all of the speakers. So with that, I'll yield the floor to Sheriff Joe, and then after Sheriff Joe, we'll hear briefly from Representative David Burnell Smith and Senator Lori Klein. So with that, Sheriff Joe.
So very briefly, I want to thank you and the legislators for being here. It's very controversial, but something has to be done. Just briefly, we had a press conference March 1 where we revealed our evidence, and we feel very strongly there was forgery on the birth certificate and the selective service form. I did write to the selective service director. Haven't received an answer, but we will continue to ask other law enforcement agencies to assist us in this investigation. But during the process, we did learn sometimes it's very difficult to get your message out, especially when the blackout scenes with the major media across our country. I spent 50 years as a top federal law enforcement officer and the sheriff, and I don't recall ever seeing a censorship or somewhat to conceal our investigation and not report it. That's another issue. But this is very important. I said after all of this, and I did start off, I talked to my chief investigator with the posse, so there'd be no taxpayer money expended. I did say I want to get into this. I want to clear the president. But unfortunately, during the course of the 6-month investigation, that did not happen. We came up with more information. I think you do know what much of the information is about. Initially, we're not going to get into everything else, but I think this bill is very important to at least, and because of what we've gone through, we think it's more important to at least have some law that you have to show that you were born in the United States. So I fully support this bill. I commend the legislators that have the fortitude to go out public on a very controversial subject. I'm not accusing the President of the United States of any crime. However, we do have 2 suspected crimes, forgery, fraud, and as a law enforcement official, I feel we have to develop that information the best way we can. Thank you.
Senator Klein.
Yes, thank you for being here today. I think this bill, HB 2480, is very important because it's going to set a precedent nationally for the bar that we expect from our public officials. Every public official should, like they take the recall or any other requirements when you sign up to be a public official, should be very clear in being able to say that they are qualified and they're pre-qualified. But what I like most about this bill, besides having the individual candidate on record, for any office in this state is the fact that you, the citizen, have standing if the person who's running or in office has perjured themselves in some way where they're not qualified for office. So I think this is a very good protection of our own liberties to have people in office that are pre-qualified. And with that, I turn it over to the next speaker.
Representative Burnell Smith.
Thank you. You know, I support this bill, and Carl asked me to come here and stand behind the sheriff because I appreciate what the sheriff done in regard to this, because it took courage to do this. Even though that, there's been some accusations by the federal government against him, he then investigated the President of the United States. And he provided me with a letter that he sent to the director of the selective service. And he also served me with a copy of Barack Obama's selective service registration form. And I challenge anyone in this room to look at this form and say it's not suspicious. It's dated July 29th, 80. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I've never seen a government official document that says 80 instead of 1980. This document has some questions, and I applaud the sheriff in writing to Director of Selective Service, Romo, and say, give me some answers. But Sheriff, I predict this. I predict in 30 days, when you ask him to give you an answer, he will not answer you. And Sheriff, stay on, because we deserve the answer. The people of Arizona deserve an answer, and the people of the United States of America deserves an answer to whether or not Barack Obama is true to his name or is he a phony. That's my comments, and I support this bill. I support Sheriff Arpaio. Thank you very much.
Randy Hatch.
Randy Hatch of the Arizona Red Mountain Tea Party. We have one of the largest tea parties in the nation, and I can tell you from my experience that every Tea Party member that I have talked to supports this bill and stronger candidate eligibility laws. Both in government and corporations today, you will find that all of them do background checks to make sure who they are hiring is who they are hiring for the job. That should be no different for any candidate that is running for office. The American people have a right, an inherent, unalienable right, to know that who they are voting for, which is probably the most sacred privilege and right we have in this country, to know that who we are voting for is a citizen of the United States or the states. Therefore, we fully support House Bill 2480, and we encourage all citizens in Arizona to call their representatives, to call Senate President Pierce, to call House Speaker Tobin, and tell them that you support the bill and that they would appreciate their support for the bill. Once again, the Tea Party support this, and we hope that Arizona will get behind it.
Thank you. We're going to dedicate a fair amount of time in the next several minutes to the chief investigator that Sheriff Joe delegated to. Mike Zullo did extensive work, and what you see here is only a snippet of it. I asked him to condense his presentation and information, and he's done so graciously. And I would imagine that at the end of this press conference, both you and I would yield to questions relative to the material. So with that, I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Mike Zullo. He'll tell you more about what he found. Yes, and please do.
Good afternoon. We have a technical problem with the laptop. What the information you were going to see was going to be nothing more than our wrap-up video conclusion, which was 4 minutes, which can be downloaded off the web, and the selective service card, which we're not going to be able to present to you here. But what I can tell you from our part in this monumental problem is the beginning of this investigation, as called for by Sheriff Arpaio, we were instructed.
Can't hear you.
We were instructed. Any better? No. Technical. I have no idea how this. talk loud.
Yeah.
We were instructed by Sheriff Arpaio to look at this in an unbiased professional manner. There were no politics involved in this. At the onset of this investigation, I told my team that we are here attempting to validate this document. Our attempts to validate the birth certificate document failed relatively early in this venture. Going forward into this document, we began to uncover more and more anomalies that could not be replicated by any test or any standard that we put forth. What that had indicated to us is this document was manufactured, constructed, and presented for a purpose. And that purpose was to deceive. That purpose meant that we had a fraudulent document. The thing that was most shocking to us was the fact that the very items to give authenticity to this document and assurance to the public that this document was creditable was the state registrar's stamp and the date stamp authorizing the registration of the document and verifying that the document is indeed factual. Those two stamps can be moved off that document, placed anywhere on the document, and they leave behind them a white ghost. There's only one way that could happen. That meant that the green safety paper background that was on that document was also placed on the document. And we discovered it was placed on the document last. That is a monumental problem. Going forward, we had to look at other information now that was surfacing regarding the identity of the candidate to be president. We were turned and pointed in the direction of a selective service card. Upon inspection of that selective service card, we discovered an anomaly that was glaring, and that had to do with the certification stamp from the post office, the date stamp, indicating that an individual presented himself for selective service as called for by law. I believe it was instituted by President Carter. I had to do it myself. You go to a post office, you present yourself, you give your identification. They take a card that you fill out, that you sign, you attest to that it is you, and they stamp it received. That date stamp, by all indications, and by our test, validate our conclusion that this document is also manipulated and most likely a forgery. That issue alone has severe ramifications, even more so than the birth certificate. There are criminal ramifications to that card. There's standing up for your country, attesting who you are. There is also statute that says that you can be held liable for not filing. You can be found guilty with a 5-year prison term and a $250,000 fine. We do not believe that card was issued in 1980, and we demonstrated that in our video. The video that we showed the press conference at the time shows that the date stamp, a year stamp, 1980, by mandate, by the post office, by mandate, by the government, has to be a 4-digit date stamp, 1980. On Mr. Obama's, it is just an 80, the 19 is missing. In addition to that, the 80 is offset far to the right and low to the right, unlike 17 other selective service cards that we received through a FOIA request from the Office of Selective Service, 2 of which came from the same post office within days of each other. This is a problem in identifying the individual or identifying actions of the individual whose name appears on the document. From our perspective, we felt compelled to check with the Secretary of State. What happens in situations like this? We came to learn that there are no statutory protections to protect the voting public from anybody who wants to appear on a ballot. As a matter of fact, it's not only unique to Arizona, it's through every state in the nation. Simply fill out a form, sign what you want to sign, give them the money, and they can be on the ballot to be President of the United States. There are no voter protections. From our perspective, this legislation that's being proposed to you today really is nonpartisan. All it has to do is protect parties on both sides. If you want to run for office, more power to you. Just be who you say you are. Let us verify who you say you are. And if there's a problem, there is recourse. You simply cannot fill out a document, attest to be someone, and then if you get found out, you walk scot-free. This legislation harms no one and stops an illegitimate candidate from running for office. And from our position, we believe it's sound, we believe it's fair, and we believe it's nonpartisan. So we obviously are in support of this. After what we've seen today, this investigation goes further. Sheriff Arpaio has commissioned us to go further into this investigation. There are numerous other avenues that we are pursuing, and we are going to continue this. So I would ask everyone to give this fair and sound consideration. Read it from a party-neutral perspective and understand it's protecting the voting public, which I am and you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the press for coming here today. I think it's appropriate and fitting that we have this press conference here in the old Senate chamber. This very building, not a little bit more than 100 years ago across the hall, they debated whether or not women should have the right to vote. And this state stepped forward as one of the first states to grant women the right to vote. So how fitting and appropriate that this state also step forward and say that our ballot, no matter what office you're running for, should have the highest degree of integrity and validity, and to give the average citizen the ability to preserve, protect, and defend their own Constitution. Couldn't be more American and couldn't be more nonpartisan. So I urge the public that's hearing this message to encourage their legislator, as well as, once again, Andy Tobin, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate President C. Pierce, to move this bill along and to hastily put it into practice. So with that, I'll yield to questions myself, and you may have some technical questions for Mr. Zullo. So is there any questions?
So what's the holdup, Carl? I mean, you can't get it through a committee?
As I understand it, I spoke with Senator Nancy Bartow 2 weeks ago, at which point she had told me she would withdraw it from the committee it was inadvertently assigned to. It was designed, this bill was a striker and was going to be what it is, ostensibly. I have a copy of the said withdrawal. I have made sure that the Senate President's office had said withdrawal from that committee. I'm being told that it can't be heard in rules because it's still in the Health Committee. I asked repeatedly, the withdrawal is here, will it please be withdrawn, will it please be heard on the floor? I have 17 state senators who have committed to vote for the bill, and I've informed the Senate President of that. I've asked him in numerous times to move the bill along. As I understand it, Senator Nancy Bartow has asked me for a thing called a laundry list. I come to understand that the request is not part of our rules in the legislature in any official capacity. It's a standard of getting an autograph from every state senator. If I can't take the word, we have two things down here at the Capitol. We have our word and our vote. And both are easy to lose if you're not careful. So if I can't trust the word of a senator I speak to face-to-face and say they're going to support the bill, to go back and ask them to initial the same card I used to mark down that they were supportive, I think it's a little over the top. But if Senator Bartow is requesting me to go to each one of the senators that said that they would support the bill, I will do that. Because the integrity of the ballot is that important. But for the last conversation I had with the Senate President a week and a half ago on that subject, he told me that that was not required in this case and that the bill would move along. So I am not clear on exactly what's happening. I'm getting mixed messages. But when I speak directly with the Senate President and Senator Bartow, I get the picture of they'll withdraw the bill from committee. Senator Bartow said that to me. The Senate President told me in no uncertain terms that I don't need a laundry list, as aforementioned, which there are no rules about that. So I don't know where to go from here other than to ask the public, to ask the Senate President why this bill isn't moving.
Has it been through Senate Jude yet?
It has been through committee. The next committee for it to be heard before is what's called Rules Committee, which is really a committee that every bill goes through. It's more of a technical procedure. It's ready to go to Rules except for the fact that they haven't withdrawn it from the Health Committee. That's the committee that Senator Bartow chairs, whom she told me she would withdraw it, and I have a copy of said withdrawal. So I don't understand what the hang-up is.
Are you fixing some kind of deadline for actually getting heard through a particular chamber by
Well, actually, yes, because the deadline at this point would be sine die, or the completion of our labors. At this point, arguably, if it's not in the Senate Rules Committee next Monday morning, probably not going to have time to have it be heard properly in the Senate and then heard back again, final read in the House.
So in effect, dead if it doesn't get heard by Monday, right?
Most likely, and you know, you can't say a bill is dead until we're sine die,
Right.
but it's on life support for sure if it's not on the Senate Rules agenda on Monday. Any other questions? Once again, I'm sorry.
I'm just a little curious about why this is winding up in a health committee. I would think logically it should go to the judiciary, and you know that Chairman Gould was going to.
The bill was a striker bill when it came over to the House. I knew, based on things happening here, that it would be a potential bill for a striker. So what I did is I asked the leadership to place the bill in the Government Reform Committee, which they did. They also placed it in health because of the former title was a title that had health in its concept. That's why it was inadvertently assigned there. That's in large part why I believe Senator Bartow had agreed, in large part, to withdraw, because it wasn't, the construct of the striker had nothing to do with health. It's election law.
So what can President Pierce do? I mean, obviously he's the leader, but what can President Pierce do if you got a committee chairman?
What can President Pierce do? President Pierce is holding the bill right now. President Pierce is complete. He's the chair of the Rules Committee. President Pierce is the decider of whether or not it gets a third read or goes on committee of the whole. So right now, it's in President Pierce's hands.
And when, has he expressed any misgivings about it?
Every conversation I've had with President Pierce has been one of clarity that he's willing to move the bill along. So I have no indications from Senator Pierce, the conversations I've had with him regarding this bill and the movement of this bill, anything other than it should be moving along.
It mystifies you, it sounds like.
It does. But you know, one of the best things here, and I really appreciate so many of you in the media here, the best things that we can do at the Capitol is put the public light on things. And when the public light is there, typically things move forward. So I thank you for being here. I thank you for your involvement. And if you have any other questions after this press conference, I stand ready to answer them. Just contact my office. Thank you. Thank you, Sheriff Joe, again for being here. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Sheriff.